I want to thank our sponsor, Asali Designs, who are a British-owned company who create top-quality, officially licensed aviation leather goods. One of their standout and popular products is their pilot bag, which come in a variety of colours including pink, which are being designed and tested by former Tornado GR4, Typhoon and display pilot Jim Peterson. Plus, they are highly recommended by both military and civilian pilots across the world. You can also personalise your own flight bag to give it that extra touch, plus Asali can create bespoke bulk orders for squadrons, flying clubs, organisations and more. I've owned a fair few of their products for many years now, and I can personally say the quality and customer service is top drawer, so check out all their other products ranging from card holders to weekend bags, and you can get 10% off your first order by signing up via their website at asalidesigns.co.uk. Thank you and enjoy. Helen, when did you become interested in aviation?
If I'm honest, when I watched Top Gun, I'm not going to lie to you. Anyone that says that they didn't is a liar. So I think I saw Top Gun. That kind of, to be honest with you, I didn't really know anything about aviation before that, and I just thought it was amazing. So that sort of prompted me to then go and look at what I could do when I was at school, and I joined the Air Cadets, and that was it. I loved it. Loved the uniform, loved the drill, loved the way of life, loved the fact that you could travel, and that kind of really piqued my interest.
Mm-hmm. So can you talk us through some of your initial flying training when you joined the RAF?
Oh, it's a building block approach, but I would say it's also a baptism of fire, just because it's obviously the first sort of look at being a professional aviator. So it comes with a lot of responsibility, and they really throw you into it. But I don't know, I think it was just really pinch yourself that you were actually, this was the start.
Yeah.
And I think I also had a little bit, I wouldn't say it was imposter syndrome, but I'd always wanted to fly helicopters. I'd got a recommend for helicopters because I did my elementary flying training when I was at university. And then the Air Force said, well, actually, we've only got fast jet slots, so go fast jet. So in a way, it almost took the pressure off a little bit, because I kind of thought, well, I'll just take every day as it comes, and then I'll eventually end up on helicopters where, you know, I didn't think I was probably good enough to go fast jet. So it kind of, in a way, almost relaxed me, which was quite good. And I sort of was able to take it in my stride. Whereas a lot of other people were obviously just single, you know, target track. They put the pressure on themselves because all they wanted to do was be a fast jet pilot. So in a way, it's sort of, I was a bit more chilled.
Yes, that's really strange, because normally everyone wants to go fast jet. No,
Yeah.
you very rarely hear, I want to go helicopter.
Yeah, no, I think it was, I wanted to go search and rescue. I think because I was reading medicine at university, I sort of had that mindset of, you know, nurturing, caring, saving lives. So I think that's where the two career paths sort of melded. But, you know, ended up taking it every day by day, and eventually got the confidence and went, actually, I'm going to do this. And, you know, ended up on fast jets, which was pretty unreal.
So when you knew you were going to go to fast jets, did you know what type you wanted to go on to?
Absolutely, 100% Tornado GR4.
Okay.
That was it, wanted to do that. I think partly because of the location. You know, I wanted to be Marham based. My parents lived in Norwich, and I just liked sort of, you know, I didn't want to maybe end up at Lucas or Leeming. Actually, so when I got streamed F3, it was a bit of a shock. It wasn't what I was expecting. And I was a bit sad about it, if I'm 100% honest. I know, I look back on it, I think, crikey, the OCE must have hated me. But actually, in hindsight, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm so pleased that it, you know, I actually really came into my own, and it was the thing that I was probably the best at. So, yeah, I'm really pleased. But no, it wasn't the career, it wasn't the jet I thought I was going to fly.
So can you talk us through some of your ground and flying training on the F3?
So I started off at 56 Squadron, which was at Lucas. First 2 weeks out to Cyprus, I just thought, wow, this is amazing. I've got to, you know, to the combat jet, and my first 2 weeks are in Cyprus, which was brilliant. Walking out to the jet for the first time is just awesome. Ground school's pretty intense. I mean, you've gone from I flew the T1 in training, so it didn't have a radar, didn't have Link 16. You know, single engine, and then suddenly you're on this massive grey fighter with 2 engines, radar, you know, secure comms, everything. You know, wow, this is a bit of a step up. So the ground school's pretty intense, trying to remember, you know, learn and remember how it all works. But yeah, Cyprus was my first trip. What was lovely is you fly with a pilot to start with, and you do your first maybe 4 or 5 trips with a pilot. And then actually the one I remember really is flying with a navigator the first time, because that's a big responsibility at that age, to fly with someone that doesn't necessarily have flying controls in the back cockpit. Is pretty, you know, is a huge ask. And I think what's lovely is it sets the tone of trust, and you realise what it's, you know, you start to then learn how to be a crew, and that's awesome.
And how did you find the wing sweep? Because it's all manual.
Nightmare. Absolute nightmare. All I would hear from the navigator was wings. Manoeuvres. Oh, forgot it. Yeah, it's pretty. You had to learn a table of speeds, and you had certain speeds that you had to move them back and then forward, depending on where you were. And but actually, as you got more experience, you could tell the jet started to tell you. It would start to rumble if you had the wings too far forward and you were going too fast. It became really obvious, which looking back, I remember thinking, God, how did I not get this when it's really obvious, but and it's just something else that you've got to remember. And that was pretty tricky, actually. But yeah, eventually, and then when you were slowing down, again, it became really obvious, because the jet would just really sort of be quite sluggish. And it was like, oh, wings. But yeah, I think the German one didn't have that. I think it had automatic wing sweep, which I honestly would have killed for.
I think the Saudis had it as well.
Is it? Oh,
yeah, the Saudis had it,
Yeah.
RAF cheapskates. So what would you say the strengths and weaknesses of the F3 were?
Weaknesses were probably the performance. It wasn't designed to be a fighter, so it wasn't its fault. But at low level, you know, acceleration power was insane, but as soon as you started getting up to the high levels, that's when it really started to struggle. And you, again, just like with the wing sweep, you had to remember all the numbers. You had to remember at certain heights different engine settings, and you had to be really careful. Above a certain height, you couldn't move the throttles because the engines would surge. So that took a lot of capacity away from you when you were trying to fight it. So I'd say that was probably the biggest weakness. But I think that its real strength by the end, you know, when I started, it had Sidewinder and Skyflash, and that was great. But semi-active missiles, not fab. And when you're warfighting, and by the end, it had AMRAAM and ASRAAM, and actually, it was with those missiles on, it was pretty decent. So I would say those are the sort of strengths and weaknesses. But low-level acceleration, insane. I remember going to Eglin and flying the F-15 Charlies. That shows my age. And I remember we would always lose in 1v1 to them, because, you know, the F-15 is a great piece of kit. But I ran away bravely once from them, and they literally said to me, "We don't know where you went. You just disappeared." That's and it was amazing. Like, you know what, the jet was so fast at low level.
I don't know if you know a bloke called David Middleton?
Yes.
Mids, yeah. So he told me a great story when he was at Red Flag and he was escorting the B-1Bs in, and then he just accelerated away at Mach 1.2 or something, and I was just like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that was cool. And not so much at 30,000 feet, more like 250 feet. But yeah, it was really cool.
So you mentioned the nav there. What was it like working with one?
Brilliant, if it was going well and you were jiving. Like, I think it was lovely. You know, there's a saying where the boat, when you're rowing, the boat's singing, because it's just, you're all in synchrony, you know, you're all synchronized, and the boat is just floating through the water and it's quiet. And that's the analogy I would use for when the nav and the pilot are just working really well together, there's just silence, but you're both working, and you can almost predict what each other's thinking. And that's brilliant. And I think two heads are always better than one. And it was lovely to have someone to bounce ideas off, or, you know, back you up if you made a decision, and, you know, they've got your back. Not so great if it wasn't working. I think you could tell when it broke down, or, you know, everyone's human. We're not robots. And some people you get on with and some people you don't. And it's sometimes very difficult, I think, to leave that personality clash behind you. You should do, but I think it's quite difficult too. So I think working with a nav was brilliant, but if it wasn't going well, it was awful.
And would you socialise afterwards as well?
Yeah,
Even if you didn't like the person in the back?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you would.
Yeah. I mean, you're a part of a team, right? And you're going to go, at the end of the day, you're going to go to war. But it wouldn't be that you were having stand-up arguments in the cockpit. It would just be that you weren't necessarily sort of working as well together as you could have been. It wasn't as, you know, it wasn't perfection like it could be, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what was your first frontline squadron?
11. 11 squadron at Leeming. And then when 11 closed, I went to 25 Squadron. And then when 25 Squadron closed, I went off to the Typhoon, and then ended up back on 11 Squadron. So that was lovely. Yeah. But I mean, the huge difference between the squadrons, I mean, just in terms of the numbers of people, There were 30 odd aircrew on the Tornado 11, when actually there were probably about 18 or so on the Typhoon. That was a big difference. But back in the day when I was on the Tornado, we didn't have email. It was lovely. You'd fly 30 hours a month. It was a different beast, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So on your frontline squadron, did you ever conduct DACT?
Yes.
And how did the F3 fare?
Not great, because it wasn't designed to do that. So DACT, really at the time, everything outperformed us. Typhoon, DACT, totally different kettle of fish, but Tornado, unfortunately, not where it wanted to be.
And did you work on any large exercises, red flag or anything like that? What was that like?
Yeah, amazing. I mean, again, I only really spent 3 years on the Tornado, so my first exercise, I'm just trying to think of the name of it, but it was a trilateral exercise in Hungary, which was awesome, against the Swedish Gripen, which had just come in, and the Hungarian MiG-29. But on Typhoon, lots more. ATLC out in the Emirates, Basama Lima, red flag, mission commander on red flag, just pinch yourself moments.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So when you were on the F3 on your frontline squadrons, did you have any exchange pilots and navs come over to work with?
Yes.
What was that like?
Yeah, awesome. I mean, it's great to, share knowledge, different procedures, and they were always really, really fun. I mean, mainly on the Typhoon, it was more Americans, because obviously there are security implications of it, but it was a bit more widespread on Tornado, and they were just fantastic. I mean, it was just brilliant to be able to share, cross-pollinate information, tactics, thoughts, way of life. It was lovely to just go around the house and have a Norwegian meal, because it was a Norwegian exchange pilot. It was awesome.
And how many female F3 pilots were on your time as well, or was it just you?
It was just, I'm going to get probably shot down by someone that was there and I've forgotten, but I think I was the only pilot at the time. There were navigators on both of the squadrons. I think I was the only one, and then when I moved over to Typhoon, I was the first, and there were then a couple after me, but I think for my period I was maybe the only one.
Was there much banter there?
Loads.
Yeah, I mean,
loads.
That's good.
But you just give as good as you get.
Of course.
It was never banter because I was a girl. It was just banter, and I would just get stuck in.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you share a few stories from your time on the F3 that stick out?
Oh, I might have to think about this one. I mean, the F3 was great. I think probably the Falklands is probably where most of the stories came from, some which I will definitely say, some which I won't. But I think there were just some amazing adventures. I remember flying one sortie with a navigator that I'd gone down to the Falklands with, and we would fly what was called an ADEX, which was us pretending to be an Exocet missile, and actually it's not training for us, it's training for the naval ship that's down there. And just, we would fly the profiles. It was called between the East and West Falkland, there is the Falkland Sound, which is obviously where the Galahad was sunk, and the A4s would fly up a very, very shallow valley, which ran, parallel to the Falkland Sound. And you would fly that profile, you'd fly up that valley and you'd try and stay as low as you could, and you'd pop up and then fly at the boat as if you were a missile. And I mean, that was just pinch yourself moment. It was awesome, and it was great to come back. And I think that was the lovely aspect of being with a nav, is that you would then just go have a cup of tea and just talk about it, and you'd be buzzing as a pair to have experienced that together. I think that was one of the best bits.
How many crews were down there in the Falklands?
I think from memory it was 4 crews, because there were 4 crews. And that was a big difference as well between Tornado and Typhoon, that certainly on quick reaction alert you'd normally have 4 people in the shed, whereas on Typhoon it was just 2, so crikey, if you didn't get on with the other person, that was a bit awkward. But just little differences like that, I think it was nice when it was double the number of people, because it was just double the fun. Yeah.
Did you live on base or were you outside?
In the Falklands?
In the Falklands, yeah.
Yeah, you live in what we know as a Death Star. It's just a massive, it's basically one long corridor with accommodation blocks and all the catering and gym, swimming pool. Because actually the Falklands, the weather can be pretty bad. And so you don't actually want to go outside too much. So it was all sort of just one massive building, and then we'd drive round to the other side of the airfield, which is where the jets were.
And how often would you be flying in the Falklands, actually?
almost
be like
every
daily?
day.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow, okay.
depending on the time of year, because the problem you had is there were mountains to the north of Mount Pleasant Airfield, and the wind would whip over those and it would cause rotors, which was super dangerous. And so if there were ever rotors in the Met report, then you were ground, you'd fly obviously if you needed to for a quick reaction alert, but not for training. So you'd often, I mean, there were sometimes, you could go a week without flying just because the wind was at that direction, at that strength, and you were sort of grounded for that week, unfortunately.
And what do you do in that week if you're off and you're not flying?
A lot of gym.
Yeah, a lot of gym, right?
Well, no, it was nice because certainly on the, it was nice to show people around the jets because, there's a whole base of people there, and also people at Stanley that could come down and they could show, you could show them around, and the locals absolutely loved it because you were the visible aspect of their defence, so they absolutely loved it because they really still had this feeling of them being defended by you, and it was, that was really nice. So you kind of got to give back, as it were. And then what was lovely is because the Falklands is so sparsely populated, they would tell you exactly where their house was. And then the next time you went flying, they said, make sure you come and fly over us. And make sure you do it twice, because you'll fly over once, that gives us time to come out and wave, and then come round again and we'll wave to you. So that was lovely.
You'd get a bollocking doing that here, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, yeah, you can't do that here.
So how many hours did you get on the F3 and did you enjoy your time on it?
Loved it. Probably, I think, about 700.
So Helen, then you went on to the Typhoon. How did this come about?
Oh, it's brilliant. Well, I was really lucky. I saw the writing on the wall with the Tornado. It was starting to wind down. My Torex was coinciding with that. And I went and spoke to my squadron boss and I said, look, I think I want to go to Typhoon. And he said, yep, cool, we'll try and get that worked out. But at the time there were no cockpits. And so he said, look, you can go to Typhoon, but you'd have to take a ground tour and go and teach in the sim. And actually I was like, yes, that is a no-brainer, which was quite odd really, because I was teaching people how to fly Typhoon, having never flown it myself. Yeah. But the sims were that good that actually it wasn't a problem. And what was lovely is that after 2 years of that, when I eventually went on to fly it, I mean, I had, having said earlier on about ground school and remembering everything, I mean, I didn't even need to think about that because I knew the jet inside out. So I could use all my spare capacity on worrying about learning how to fly and operate it rather than how it works. So that was really cool.
So when you joined, what was the role of the Typhoon? Was it mainly air-to-air or...?
It was completely air-to-air.
Was it?
Yeah,
right.
that didn't change until we went to LME in 2011, which was nice because I felt really in my comfort zone because the weapons were the same. The concept, the tactics were all the same. It was just that you were in a different jet. And actually, if anything, life was a bit easier because it was carefree handling. I didn't have to worry about those engine settings at high level. I didn't have to worry about accelerating to get up to height because the jet performance was so good that had just gone away, which was brilliant.
You mentioned the sim there, but what was your ground and flying training like? Was it, obviously you came from a 2C background. What was that like?
Big change. That was probably the biggest change, I think. I'd always had someone to bat ideas off and, two heads are better than one. I always had two sets of eyes in the cockpit. And I think it was just a bit different in concept. I remember my first solo on Typhoon and the thing I spent the entire time doing was looking behind me and all I could see was metal. Yeah. And I was like, wow, there's no one else there. And I know that sounds really daft. I should have been looking out the window and going, selecting full burner and enjoying the acceleration. But it was that was the biggest change for me. And, I came to realise eventually, because I'd been on Tornado, because I was a bit more experienced, I got my pairs lead really quickly. Yeah. And, there's been a lot of trust between me and the navigator in the jet, but that trust is exactly the same. It's just a pilot in another jet. But how I led the formation did affect how they... whether they came home safely or not. So that circle of trust just sort of widens a little bit. So it's the same concept, it's just that you're in a different piece of metal.
Yeah, and did you know you were going to be the first female Typhoon pilot, or was that not even an issue when you were going through?
No, I did know that.
Okay.
Yeah, I knew that there was no one else really in the pipeline. I didn't realise it was going to be for so long. I think it was 5 years before the next female pilot came along. But that was okay. I mean, I don't think it really was an issue. I didn't, I never went to work saying, I'm Helen, the female pilot. You know, I was always just Helen, the pilot, and it was never a thing. So that was fine.
And can you remember your first takeoff, and was it a performance takeoff?
It wasn't. I do remember it. It was a normal takeoff, but I do remember I did a performance takeoff dual, and then I think on my second or third solo I did a performance takeoff, and it's like nothing you've ever experienced. It feels like you're going into outer space because you plug the burners in, you release the brakes, you accelerate. And you rotate at 130 knots, and you're rotating before the cable, which is less than 1,000 feet in. I'm gonna live it with you now. You rotate 60 degrees nose up, gear goes up. You've got to get the gear up because if you forget that, you're in trouble. 10-13 on, because also if you forget that, you're in trouble. And you have to get those things out of the way before you start just looking outside. And you're climbing, and you climb up to 5,000 feet, over-rotate, keep the burners in to accelerate to 250. And as you over-rotate, you are not at the end of the runway. Jesus. And you're already at 5,000 feet, which is why you've got to get the gear up and 10-13 on straight away, because if you forget it, you are behind the jet already. And it's just the most amazing feeling. Yeah. It really is. And what's very cool is I saw a video of it, and the noise is insane. You obviously don't feel it or hear it in the cockpit, but from outside, the noise is just intense.
Yeah, yeah. And did it feel like a complete leap forward from the F3, both on performance and in the cockpit, for instance? Performance
and the cockpit, the ergonomics, the fact that it's very clean, and you've got 3 coloured TV tabs compared to the F3. Those were huge differences. But back at the start of Typhoon, you know, the weapons weren't maybe as well established as they had been on Tornado. So actually, the weapons integration maybe wasn't as forward as I thought it was going to be. So I think there were some aspects that were, and then some that weren't right at the start.
Mm-hmm. And what year was this when you actually joined the Typhoon force?
So the simulator was 2007, right. And then I first flew in 2009.
So, and then your first squadron was 11?
11,
so what was that like, and did it feel different from the F3 days?
Well, there were... Yes, although obviously some of the pictures on the wall were the same. And what was lovely is that I did a fly past when the 11 Squadron handed over from Tornado to Typhoon. And it was us in the Tornado with the 11 Squadron tail fin. With the new squadron, I had the current squadron boss navigator in my back seat, and I had the new Typhoon squadron boss in the Typhoon. And when I first walked into the squadron, there was a photo of that. And I was like, oh, well, that's lovely, because I've got now a photo on the wall of me in the Tornado, but now I'm coming into the squadron as a Typhoon pilot. So that was lovely. It kind of made me feel at home. Yeah. But there were differences. I mean, the badges were different. You know, it used to have 2 eagles on the crest. It doesn't now. It has 1. And just little changes like that made it feel different. But obviously, the building was new. I mean, in the Tornado, we used to work in a PBF, you know, in the hardened pilot briefing facilities, and that felt quite sort of Cold War-esque. Right. Whereas obviously at Coningsby, everything was a bit newer and a bit more shiny. So it did feel like it had moved on.
Yeah. And did everyone who came to the Typhoon, were they all XF3 as well, or was it?
It was a real mix. Yeah, totally. Well, actually, at the time, Harrier, Jaguar, Tornado. So there was a lot of banter from that, because I remember flying when I eventually became an instructor. I remember flying with a guy who had not flown with a radar before. He'd been Harriers and then into the Reds. And he said, oh, Helen, I think the jet's broken. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, I can feel this thudding. And I said, oh, no, that's the radar. Yeah, welcome to the wonders of the Mexican radar. But, you know, just little things like that. It was funny because there was a real meshing of people together and a lot of different experiences and knowledge, which was actually, I think it stood the force in good stead. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about DACT on the Typhoon.
Oh, yeah.
What was that like? And
brilliant.
What did you go up against?
Well, it was nice to finally have a dog in the fight, you know, and pretty much most of the 4th gen fighters, the Typhoon was better. Mm-hmm. It's got very good energy regain. You can go slow, you can get down to base, and then you can just go up again because you can put the burners in and accelerate. 5th gen, different story. I've you know, F-22 1v1 was pretty wild what you saw them do. I mean, that was amazing. That was over in Exercise Western Zephyr in Langley. But there was DACT. We did. I went on a trials sortie when I was on 41 Squadron, and we flew over to China Lake to do some laser designation pod work. And after that had finished, the VX squadron there said, oh, do you want to do some 1v1? And actually, interestingly, that squadron was the squadron that had done a lot of filming for Top Gun 2. Right. So they were spinning some dits about Tom Cruise. Yeah. And we did a 1v1. So I went out, did some DACT with them, and we had been beating them just because of the difference in performance. The F-18 is really good. It can go slow. It's got high alpha. But once it's used that, cashed that in, that's it.
Yeah.
And we ended up, we started at 15,000 feet, did a rate down to base. And actually, we were pretty neutral at the bottom. And we came back, and the guy was like, oh, you know, did you make a mistake? I was expecting to be beaten. And I didn't have the heart to say to him, I'm really sorry, but when my engines had stopped. So actually, I was single engine at the time, and that's why I had to come home. Right. And you sort of saw his face drop, because I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. That I was actually fighting you single engine. Oh, and that was not me. You know, it was all the jet. The jet's performance was incredible.
Did you get to go up against the Rafale?
Rafale, we did as a squadron, but that was when I was a student, so I didn't, because I hadn't done combat by then. And I haven't since, but yeah, no, I've F-15, F-18, F-22, MiG-29 I've done a lot of combat with, but yeah, the F-22 was just incredible, what it could do. It literally would do something in front of you which you couldn't even understand. I don't know how to fight that, because I didn't know that was physically possible.
Yeah. So when you flew on large exercises, what do the Americans think of the Typhoon? Were they impressed with it?
I think, again, there were certain, I think it's still evolving, and I think it's maybe maturing to a really good place now. Back in 2013, we went to Red Flag, and there were certain elements of it that it couldn't do yet, which I think was quite frustrating. But the performance was always impressive. I mean, I led a package, and I said, so Typhoon's going to go out in block 5, so 50-odd thousand feet. And I said, oh, F-15s, guys, can you come out in block 4, and then we'll have the F-18s in block 3? And they were like, no, we can't even get to block 4. So, and they could not believe that we could commit in block 5. Oh. And so there were certain aspects that were really, really good. And the defensive aid system they were really impressed with that. But there were certain things that we couldn't do. So I think there's always pros and cons, isn't there? And it's always nice to know what you can't do, because then that means that you can start working on that. You know, I think.
It wasn't great in the low speed handling, was it? Or was that?
Low speed, I mean, it's not an alpha fighter.
Yeah.
You know, you could only pull a certain amount of alpha, and then, but what was exceptional about it was then if you did put the blowers back in, you could then regain that energy. So as long as you hadn't got so slow that you were getting shot, you could almost always get yourself out of trouble.
Nice. So, do you have any memorable stories from your time on Typhoon?
On Typhoon, again, let me think.
Your brain here.
I think one of the most amazing sorties was flying over to Red Flag. I mean, pinch yourself moment. You're leading a 4-ship over the Grand Canyon. I mean, that is just, without doubt, one of the best things. And I think also one of my last trips on Typhoon was lovely. I didn't realise I was going to stop flying. I got medically discharged, but one of the last sorties was just punching through the cloud and seeing the sun, and that was just, everyone else had a grey day, and I saw the sun.
Incredible.
But I think that was very cool. But I think I flew in Libya, and that was my first operational sortie, and that was definitely pinch yourself, because I looked at the coastline and went, wow, that is actually, enemy territory, and I'm actually now going to put all my training into practice, which I haven't done before. Yeah. So that was very cool.
And you felt comfortable going into live ops in the Typhoon?
Yeah, absolutely, because we have a phrase, train hard, fight easy, and that's the whole point. It's why you expend your blood, sweat and tears during training, because then you can be cool and calm, and you feel like you've got the capacity to deal with anything when you go on to operations. It doesn't mean you're not scared or nervous or excited. I mean, you don't want to let anyone down. You don't want to let the country down. But it does give you that capacity to be really. I was, the cockpit was quiet. I was calm. I knew exactly what I had to do, and that was a really good feeling.
And did you ever want to go for the display pilot slot, or was that 29 only?
No, that was 29, and I did end up on 29, and what was lovely is that all the pilots that went for the display, when they were asked, who do you think the display pilot should be, they all said Helen, which was a lovely endorsement. But it wasn't really my thing. Okay. I know that sounds daft. I liked fighting, and I liked being on the frontline squadron. I liked instructing people how to do that, and it wasn't, the display side of the house it didn't really float my boat. And at the time I was thinking about, I was getting on a bit, so I was thinking about being a mum, and I didn't think that those two necessarily went hand in hand. So I didn't go for it. But what was lovely was that I had that endorsement from the people that were.
What was being an instructor like?
Terrifying and brilliant. No, I think, it's, you've always got flying controls in the back cockpit, because it's not like the Tornado that it's a fighter. With the twin sticker on Typhoon, it is a training aircraft. But I've had to take control a few times. The student in the front cockpit on his night sortie totally lost all of his communications. I was having to shout from back to front, say, put the gear down, because you didn't have a gear controller in the back cockpit, and I had to land it from the back. So there were moments of terror. But I think for me, my memory was just, it was so rewarding when I finally got through to someone what they were doing wrong, as in, it clicked. And it was lovely that when you got to spend that time and you really unpicked it and you got to the bottom of it, and then they started to just, skyrocket. Yeah. And that was such a lovely feeling. You really felt like you'd earned your money as an instructor then. Yeah. That was really cool.
So how many hours did you get? I'm guessing you obviously enjoyed your time there.
Yes, without doubt. So on Tornado was 700, Typhoon was about 1,500. Nice. So I was really lucky. I only did that one ground tour in my career on the simulator, and then had a bit of obviously time off when I was pregnant. But other than that, after I came back from maternity, went straight on to 41, which was brilliant. Yeah, nice. That was a very cool squadron to be on.
And we've got a couple of personal questions to wrap up here, if you're happy with that.
Of course.
So do you have any hobbies?
I've got 3 kids, so I don't really have much time for anything else. So the answer is, honestly, no. That's really bad, isn't it? I do like to try and keep myself as fit as I can. Unfortunately, I've got a bit of a neck injury, so I'm not probably as fit as I would like to be. But I do that. We do a lot of walking and things. And, I quite like just doing mundane stuff. I've had 20 odd years in the Air Force of just, literally different times every day, different countries, going to war, going on operations, going on exercises. Actually, my hobby is just being at home, being a mum.
Like having
absolutely. Just, I got asked the other day, do you get bored of not flying around at 600 miles an hour? And it's like, no, I love it.
Nice. Favourite aircraft you have flown?
Typhoon. Without, hands down.
One you would like to fly, either past or present?
Ooh, F-22. Definitely. I think, F-22.
Brilliant answer. And can we find you online?
Yes. So my friend Rosie and I, we've set up a business called On a Mission, and you can find us at www.weareonamission.co.uk.
Brilliant stuff. Well, Helen, thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Cheers.